So, in essence, there's nothing the left side of the brain can do that the right side couldn't do better. And beyond that, and ideally, you would have two halves of the brain that were fully functional. It wouldn't be specialist abilities. There'd be two sides of a phenomenally functional piece of equipment.
It's interesting. I'm just thinking there's a clip on YouTube which I've had recommended from several sources over the past few months, and it's a woman who had I forget her profession, but she certainly worked with the brain somehow, and she had a stroke, and the stroke was affecting the left-hand side of her brain, and she was watching the whole thing from the right-hand side of the brain, and she saw very clearly what happened, but without any fear. It was just like a commentary on what was happening, and she was actually perfectly okay.
I'm guessing that would be Jill Bolt-Taylor.
Could have well have been, yes.
She was, I don't know if she still is, a neuroanatomist. She
That's
sort of
right,
studied the brain.
yeah.
I've had a little bit of correspondence with her because I'm obviously fascinated by her experience, and there are a few parallels with my own early experience. Her perspective, at least the last exchange we had, was not atypical of people who are interested in left-right brain thinking, in that, yes, we need them both, and yes, I could see all this going on, but I couldn't, I think she used the example, she couldn't figure out how to dial the numbers to get this kind of thing, the emergency services and so on. And I totally understand that. I'm sure that was her experience. However, I think I mentioned before that I'm proposing the left side of the brain is not a functional, it's a sort of dysfunctional version of the right. The other piece of the jigsaw, and quite a big piece of the jigsaw, and this goes back to the evolutionary biochemistry, through development, through the construction materials, the sort of molecular engineering of how it's designed and built, is very high specification, and we don't have that anymore. So even if you're lucky enough to remove the influence of the left side of the brain or reduce it, what you're accessing is still a very dormant, even subconscious right brain. And on the one hand, that's phenomenal. On the other hand, it's not fully engaged. It's a bit like taxiing up and down the runway in Concorde or something. I mean, amazing piece of kit, but you need to get it off the ground, and that rarely happens, I think.
We were talking before we started recording. It's your parallel was, which I do understand, was a bit like you bought this supercar and a new Ferrari or something, and you kind of recommend you know certain fuel and oil and looking after it. You put the wrong fuel in, and you don't replace the oil, and you don't basically take care of the car, so it's going to break down. And that's the way you feel, isn't it? We've got a fantastic, incredible equipment here.
Amazing,
you know, it's so complex, and yet we don't give it the raw ingredients. Sorry for the pun here, the raw, but we don't give it the ingredients that actually it needs. We just give it anything we fancy. We go with our palate, as opposed to what scientifically we should be feeding our brain.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a, you know, I wouldn't say paradox, there's sort of a circular argument within that, in that our palate, you know, if our left brain's dominant, it's influencing everything, including our palate, so it's almost guiding its own dysfunction. The things that it might be attracted to aren't necessarily going to be what it needs to work. Its ability to see what's good for itself is almost gone, I would say. So yes, I totally agree with that. I go one step further and say we don't provide the biochemical environment in which it develops, let alone what we build it from. And I mean, I'm sort of throwing quite a few things in here, but one of the key features I'm interested in with diet isn't just the build quality, however important that is. It's partly the hormonal influence that was key in our ancestral diet. The chemicals in our plant-based diet, the sort of pigments in fruit that give fruit the coloration, they have very powerful hormonal effects. In fact, they're studied in modern science, and they're called endocrine disruptors. In other words, they will interfere with the operation of our own hormones, and that's seen as well. Is that potentially dangerous? Yet they were present 24/7 and still are in the sort of ecology of the great ape diet. And they have the ability to change the way the DNA is read. That's what hormones do. If these things were present for tens of millions of years, and suddenly they were gone, you end up, it's a bit like we have the blueprint to build this amazing flying machine, shall we say, and then we sack the craftsman and we bring in some fly-by-night builders who buy cheap stuff from a DIY shop instead of a specialist supplier, and they can't even read the plans. So it's more than just the building materials that have gone astray.
So your feeling is that if we as a human race essentially changed our diet and respected what our brain needed in terms of raw materials, we would still maintain our... Because we have brilliance a lot of the time. We have, you know, what we've done and what we've managed to do with our resources is brilliant, what we've invented. On the other hand, as you were saying right at the beginning, we have this brilliance and we use it in the most stupid way at times. We build these war machines and then we use them against each other. We could use that technology in a very positive way. So what you're feeling is if we change the diet, we'd still have our brilliance, which the apes didn't have. They were very simple animals. We'd maintain that, but at the same time we would have the intelligence of a wider picture and see that we are all interconnected, that we do need to observe that the resources of the earth are finite and live in a much more sensible way. Am I summarising this correctly?
Yeah, more or less. I mean, we touched on the sort of left-right brain, and one of the things that comes up time and time again with the right brain's influence on our consciousness, on our perception, is empathy and a sense of connectedness. And bearing in mind, I'm saying that's the last vestige of the overall function that both sides of the brain would have exhibited these properties. And yes, I mean, I'm probably more interested in the psychology and perception. That's really where we're in serious trouble. The brilliance that you allude to, and I agree with, I think would be even more profound. However, quite what we'd use it for and how we'd apply it would be radically different. Just because we can make phenomenally clever computer chips and make video games, I mean, yes, there's technical brilliance in there. Whether that would be something we'd actually want to do, let alone design stealth bombers or whatever, you know, there's a massive conflict there, I think.
And you also talk, again, you just alluded to it, that the hormonal, what you see as an imbalance, and you mentioned in the book that basically, correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I remember is that basically children are maturing too early because the diet is too testosterone dominated.
Yes, yeah. Going back to the sort of the evolutionary picture, and I mean, part of what I'm interested is really unifying these ideas and saying that the standard theory of evolution, the evidence there correlates quite well with the traditions of consciousness. You have to change the context a little bit. And if our evolution was, and our consciousness system was sculpted, and part of the design was based on the plant hormones, very powerful, unless we take that into account, we're never going to have a fully developed consciousness system. And I think it would be impossible to make such a claim if there weren't a lot of evidence that our hormonal system had gone to hell, basically. If there were developmental issues, if we were susceptible to estrogen-dependent cancer, if ASD, autistic spectrum disorders, which are related to hormone imbalance, weren't very widespread, if Alzheimer's wasn't getting earlier and earlier, if our period of juvenility wasn't reducing, where that's the window of brain development, that's shrinking.